Good morning and thank you for staying with us. You're listening to Smooth 98.1, Smooth Breakfast with me, Valentine.
And Fola, good morning.
Good morning to you, and special thanks to our analysts for coming in this morning. Adenike Oyetunde, hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning
Is
to
it
you.
both of you that has a cold?
Okay, I'm good. I'm good.
Stay clear of
We're all the men
Valentine.
sharing.
Excuse me.
And so glad to see you finally, after the long
Valentine was one
travel.
week.
It wasn't. Honestly, it felt like 3 weeks.
Don't be dramatic. It was
Who,
1 week.
who else feels like Fumi has been gone for a month? Please send us
Me.
messages on WhatsApp. That number is 0809444091. Fumi Odunde is on Twitter as that name as well. Fumi Odunde. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Valentine. Good morning.
Good morning. And you can send us messages through Twitter.
Absolutely. You can tweet at smooth981fm. Hashtag is breakfast981 and post freshly pressed 981.
And we're streaming live on YouTube. And you can also send a message on that WhatsApp number again.
0809 444 That's our WhatsApp number. Please remember to put your name and your location.
Mhm.
All right, moving on to the first story from the Punch newspaper. Adenike, this is for you. The chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, Professor SAGAY, has commended the All Progressives Congress administration under President Buhari for stepping up the fight against corruption in the country. And this is in a bid to ensure good governance and development.
Okay, so this was actually at a workshop organized by what's it called? Yeah, PACAC. There you go. That's them. And he was represented at that particular workshop. And one thing that has caused this particular news to make headlines is because he had mentioned that jailing corrupt people was a waste of time. And Isesage said that jailing people was a desperate and wasteful effort, given the weakness in the country's judicial process. And the first thing that your first reaction you get is, if you are complaining, if you who people have known to be a legal luminary for such a long while is complaining about the system, what are you doing? What recommendations have you made? How are we ensuring that a lot more can be done? As if that wasn't funny enough, he also did mention that the federal government wasn't just focusing on financial corruption, but had mentioned, has stated that the truth is nepotism is one of the problems that we're being faced with in this country, and it was necessary for us to, for individuals to start to call out corrupt persons. And I did have a lot of questions. And one of the questions that I have is the fact that after urging individuals to expose corrupt individuals in their midst, irrespective of political affiliations or religious backgrounds and all of it, to what end? So we call them out and we're still going back to the same judicial process that you're complaining is not helpful in this fight against corruption. What happens at that particular point in time? And then secondly, if we're saying that we no longer want to jail these corrupt individuals, do we have measurements as to people who we have jailed over a period of time, and if it has been corrective? We all know that there's nothing so much corrective about incarcerating people. And when that is not proven, how do we move forward from there? Thirdly, what facilities have we set up in ensuring that we have, good enough places to incarcerate people if and where we desire as a people that incarceration is best for corrupt individuals? There are many questions that come to bear, and I don't think that he has answered it. He has just also left this conversation open again.
Interpretation.
It's just left it open, and it just continues to move around the wheel, and it doesn't lead anywhere. Now, he's saying that we need to strengthen the judicial process. And my question then is, whose responsibility is it to reorientate people about values? It's a national orientation agency. It was established in 2005. And I can tell you that if we ask a lot of individuals who were smart enough at that point in time, one time that we know that NUA has worked clearly was during its campaign for NAFDAC during Dora Kimili. After that, a lot of times, nobody has really known what they've done. So if we're saying that NOA has to do its job, my question is, who's going to push, who's going to compel NOA to do its job, who's going to tell NOA where to go, how to get into the interlands, who's going to tell NOA to speak to people like us about value reorientation, so that we understand that corrupt practices and corrupt individuals can no longer live peacefully in our environment. I, for one, do not believe that incarcerating people actually just changes them behaviorally. But the question is, what other process and what other means are we as the Nigerians open to, subjecting these people
I
to?
think it's a question of consequences. I mean, what consequences then do we have, for these crimes? Because the prof says that, corruption has primarily been fought by the federal government in the country, and there's too much focus on financial corruption. How do you say there's too much focus on financial corruption?
I suspect that is why he'd mentioned clearly that we need to move past financial corruption and also put the bucket, drop the responsibility on the laps of individuals, where he mentioned categorically that you need to start to call out these corrupt individuals. We know that financial corruption is not the only type of corruption that exists.
Indeed.
That he mentioned nepotism, that is one of the biggest problems that we are faced with as a people, as Nigerians. But the question is, would you call out your neighbor whose son did not qualify for something, but because his wife's older brother is senior sister,
Is,
what happens?
We do a lot of calling out in this country.
Well, that's I mentioned that. To what end?
But I don't see Nigerians have lost shame. Like
there's no shame.
Calling out is no big deal.
There's no shame. There is no shame.
I think there is no shame because there are no consequences really. So people have no reason to be ashamed. I'm moving on to Funmi with this story. President Muhammadu Buhari yesterday has renewed the tenure of the Accountant General of the Federation, Mr. Ahmed Idris. The renewal of his tenure is the first official appointment by the president 3 weeks after he was sworn in for his second term.
And hence the story.
Story, exactly.
Like the news report was so short. We have our first appointment.
We don't have to wait 6 months, huh?
Yeah.
Well, is 3 weeks not enough for one? Like, let me show you all you people that have been complaining about my being Baba go slow. Let me give you this one. So a lot of things have been said about the president's style of governance with regard to his ministers and other appointments, especially in the second term. We see some of the appointments he has made, some of the people still in their offices right now. Like, even this appointment was announced by someone in the head of the civil service and all of that. So we still have, and the letter was signed by the secretary to the government of the federation. So we still have people from the last administration still functioning, and a lot of people are wondering when he's going to confirm, reappoint, change. Yes, and all of that. So if we look at what the position of the law is with regards to this. Okay, so there are different kind of appointments. We know that for the ministers, they need the confirmation of the Senate, and so, well, I don't know if he's waiting for them to begin sitting, convene again to.
This is just assuming he intends to change any minister.
Well, even if he does not intend to change, he has to
write a letter to inform them.
Yes, because they were confirmed by the 8th National Assembly.
So the 9th has to.
The 9th, they have to go through another process of confirmation by the 9th. Even if the president is the same, the National Assembly is not the same. Then we have another category of people, the special advisors and the presidential appointments. Those kind of appointments rest solely with the president. Now, the wording of the Constitution is that the appointment is at the pleasure of the president and shall cease when the president ceases to hold office. So it's, lawyers know how to. I and Nikki decide to do debates, and she takes one side and I take the other side. It will be the question of, did he cease to hold office after the elections, and then was he now well, we all know he was re-elected.
He was re-elected, but
is that a continuum?
At what point did he stop?
Yeah, is he still in office from 2015, or is this a new? There's a lot of technicality behind it, but more importantly, beyond what the law says, I think is the fact that Nigerians are beginning to lose confidence. We were expecting that they've lost already. We're expecting that 4 years was enough time. The excuse in 2015 was it's a new person, he has to see through, look through all the handover reports. But 4 years is enough time to gather enough momentum to move a lot faster. Exactly. So people were expecting, and then there are some things that are unnecessary. Even if the provision is subject to diverse interpretations, it is futile for us to begin to waste time on the legality or constitutionality of whether these people can continue, when a simple letter, a simple act of have been appointed can avoid such controversy. So yes, it is worrying.
All right, messages here. We have this one. Somebody says, well, it actually feels like 2 months after me. Ozzy says, Auntie Funmi, it felt like a month for real. I missed you.
Oh, thank you.
Roha Victor from Lekki Phase 1 says, did SAGAY, as Professor Ise SAGAY, actually talk about nepotism? Nepotism is the right word to describe this administration. Andrew from VI says, on Fumi's absence, phew, it feels like too long. Welcome back, Funmi. And also says, Professor Ise SAGAY should talk to his boss, the president, about nepotism. And more messages. And says, Funmi has been gone for a year. Glad to have you back. As a legal luminary, Ise SAGAY knows some corrupt individuals. Let him take the lead. And Tayo says, PMB is giving Nigerians snippets like grapevine with this appointment of accountant general. When are we expecting the ministers?
And the question. All right, moving on to this story from New Telegraph, and this should interest Adenike. So APC lawmakers elect deny invitation to the inauguration of the 7th Assembly. As the crisis rocking the APC Congress in Edo State, which culminated in the closed-door election of Honorable Frank Okie as Speaker, continued yesterday, 16 of the members-elect have denied receiving invitations to the inauguration of the state's 7th Assembly.
I read it, and it just took me back memory lane to the times of the Chuba Calibos, when people would run into the house and then carry the mace and run, and and that era, especially a first term for democracy in Nigeria, saw a lot of drama and saw so many legislators. I remember how many speakers we had, and I then remember that even in this part of the country, they were still boxing themselves sometime last year. It's very worrisome, because not only did they elect a speaker, they elected a speaker out of a 24-member house. 16 people are claiming that they did not get an invite. Whose responsibility is it to have invited these people?
Or were they not invited on
Is this a clerical error?
Exactly. Those are the questions but they are claiming that they did not get an invitation. Now, there are many questions. 9:30 p.m. was when the speaker was elected. And Funmi and I were trying to do some
9:30
p.m.
Okay.
But we're trying to do some housekeeping to check whether there's actually a time frame within which these activities. Well, unfortunately, we couldn't get to that part, so we're still unsure whether or not there is a time frame. But even if the law stipulates that you must carry out legislative activities between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., there's always an exception to almost every rule. So because we do not know that, we're just going to leave that hanging. But most importantly, the 24 members. So it means that quorum is, as we already know, is 1/3 of it, which is 8. And they're claiming that 9 members elected the speaker. So it means that there was quorum. So my question is, whose responsibility? The 16 members who are claiming that they were not invited, how much water does their complaint now hold, knowing full well that they did not have a say, in selecting who will preside over their own activities? At what point in time will the clerk of the house say, you know what, the oath of office that was administered to these 9 people, inaugurating the 7th Assembly of Edo State is null and void and is illegal, and for that particular reason, all members must be present?
So the 16 lawmakers that were exempt, they have a spokesman, Washington Osifo, who said that the clerk of the house called them at about 5:30 p.m. to inform them about it. But he said he was going to call back after 30 minutes. But
and they did not. And they now saw pictures on social media. Now showing they've been.
I'm curious. What was the content of that phone call? So he called first at 5:30 to say what, to invite them verbally?
Maybe he's probably saying that I've just been summoned to the house. We heard that the governor has sent a letter, so I'll call you back to keep you updated. So Baba got there and found out that not only was it just an ordinary letter, but it was a letter saying, see, these people, let's do this thing. And he got there, a member. They said there was a member who was there in his flip-flop.
Right.
And I'm wondering,
Okay.
All right, let's go on to this day newspaper. The federal government has called on Nigerians to disregard rumors of a positive case of Ebola virus disease in the country, saying efforts had been heightened at the various ports of entry in the country to ensure that people with illness coming into Nigeria are properly screened. I'm guessing this is a response to the stories flying around,
Yes.
especially with the case that was reported in Uganda.
Yes, so it's at the moment it's Uganda and the DRC that have resurgence of Ebola, and one thing that makes the story very personal, hit home is the fact that people started carrying news about a woman who did come in from DRC and wasn't feeling too well, and she was put aside, and then the Lagos State people came and took her somewhere. Well, they've tested her blood and they've said that it was negative to Ebola, and that she's now fine, she's well. But we remember at that point when it felt like everything had gone down for this Ebola scare, where we continue to say we need to continue to be cleanliness.
Yes.
Now the question is, I know that it's outside of Nigeria, and I know that the Ministry of Health and the permanent secretary and then the Lagos State officials have come out to say, hey, there's no cause for alarm. How much effort have Nigerians put individually, collectively as a family unit and as organizations, ensuring that we have continued this cry for cleanliness? The reality is very little. At a point, you go to places and you see this massive. I remember the gist of the young man and his family who had just imported sanitizers, and they cashed out.
Yes, no,
they really did cash out.
But right now,
Where?
nobody cares.
Nobody
about
does all of this because
anymore.
we're always so
because
reactive.
the season is over.
We are so reactive as a people.
It's
You know what's even interesting, Adenike? I like that you mentioned that you just described in apt terms our reaction to issues like this. Right now, there's cold everywhere.
Yes,
and
it's
the
nobody.
weather is rife with flu.
Blaming the weather.
Don't mind him.
It's the weather, and how careful are we to little things?
We don't even know. In the
things.
abroad, you see them say, "I'm going to take my shots." People think it's just fancy. We don't talk about things like that here.
Laugh, we'll say,
and I know that public health officials are doing the capacity, particularly what they can do within the resources that they have. But the reality is, with this Ebola crisis, we will never forget, and God continue to rest her soul, Stella Adadevo, and her selfless sacrifice to this country. And for that one reason, I would always ask that the federal government, state government, local government, individuals have to ensure that nothing is left untouched.
Yes.
Point of entry is not only aeroplane.
No.
What about roads?
Our borders.
Exactly.
The borders are very porous.
Nobody is doing anything about it. You get there, they're probably just asking you for your passport, asking you to bring this paper.
Asking you to pay 2,000.
God bless you. Nobody's talking about the health hazards that could possibly come in human form and just walk through the borders.
And really, Adenike, how many Adedevils do we have available now?
My brother, life is sweet.
Let's move on to our next story. We encourage you to send in your messages on WhatsApp 0809-444-0981. This one's from Benga Komu. He says, how can 9 out of 24 members elect a speaker? What the sign shows at the heart of it is our leaders are anti-democratic and try to have their way no matter what. This drama is just beginning. So who has confidence, he says in another vein, who has confidence in those manning our borders, that they won't let their unscrupulous ways allow those with Ebola enter the country? We're in God's hands.
God again.
Yeah.
The next story is from the Vanguard newspaper. Imo Assembly moves to probe OKOROCHA'S university. That's what they call the university, but in the real sense, they don't know who really funds it or funded it. So the Imo State House of Assembly yesterday moved a motion calling on Governor Emeka Ihedioha, the new governor of Imo State, to set up a committee to investigate the real owner of the Eastern Palm University that was established under the administration of the past governor. Your thoughts on this, Funmi?
Okay, so this particular past governor has a lot of allegations.
You don't look for my trouble, I will not look for your trouble.
With regards to how he spent public funds. And yes, a lot of probe usually goes on past administrations, especially where you have another party in, or there was no love lost between the last governor and the incoming governor. But it would be nice to see a probe for the reason of holding people accountable, not for political reasons only. Well, the political reason is why you are doing it, as long as we the people get yes. So a member of the House moved a motion that for the House to investigate the real owner of Eastern Palm University, because according to him, it is believed that that university was built with Imo State funds and is currently run by a private individual. What is interesting to me was some of the comments of other members. So some of the members said they were not against the motion, but that they should remember OKOROCHA'S free education program. Another person said, well, the former governor has done so well in the name of free education, and I know that this university is one of his properties. I think the governor should concentrate and move the state forward and not be distracted with so many of these things. I mean, have we gotten to the stage where we give people a pass on stealing funds because they also use part of the funds to do the job they were even it's not a good act. A good act is something you do out of the goodness of your heart. This is an act that you did. You were carrying out your job. It's not a good act per se. It's not charity. It wasn't your private money that you used to do it. So when we see members of the House ready to give a pass to the governor because he made free education available, and therefore assuming it is true, it's okay for him to have used public funds to build a private university for himself. It's worrying. So yes, I like the idea of probes. I think it will help our governors know that if I leave office, I don't entirely get a pass. If EFCC does not chase me, maybe my state. And it's time for us to actually begin an accountability from local levels and particularly state levels. We are not in Imo, so we don't know what's happening. So the Imo people and their representatives in the House, they should hold their representatives accountable, to hold past governors accountable. It's very important. We make too much of this thing federal level, so let's start from the state level. And even if they are doing it for political reasons, we the people, as long as we get the results we are looking for, the result we are looking for is probe.
And as much as it's you've acknowledged that it's been said in some quarters that he made free education, or he made education free in some parts of Imo State. It'll be interesting to note that the school fees right now for that university, the Eastern Palm University, is at a flat rate of 500,000 naira per term. So how free is that? Let's move on now to next stories. This one is from the Premium Times publication. Nigerian Senate President spokesperson appointment sparks controversy. People are reacting to this because the man who has been given this role, appointed as the special advisor on media and publicity to the Senate President, Ahmed Lawan, his name is Festus Adedayo. He's known to be a very strong critic of the Buhari-led administration. And so party members are crying foul and saying, Ahmed Lawan, you know who this man is? He doesn't have any good thing to say about the APC government, so why are you appointing him?
Let me not put myself in trouble. Because when I saw all this, my own thought was, hope this is not a scheme to actually shut this guy up. Because from experience, people that we've respected in the media, they get this appointment and then they become singing praises. They become somebody else. A lot has been said about he wants to, about how he's including folks that are not necessarily in line with APC, how it's about the experience and what have you. Yeah, so I don't want myself because particularly for media people.
Yes.
Right from 1999, we've had people in the media that before they went in, I don't know, it's as if there's something after you're appointed. You begin to see things that you didn't see when you were criticizing.
Yes, he's one of the first. Yes, very, very clear. I Adenike, I'm glad you're naming them, so it's not coming from me. No, the thing, but not to knock this guy or his effort, because he made some statements that kind of hints at the fact that, this is not what I wanted. it was thrown at me, so
You
I'm
can actually
considering
turn
it.
things down. You can
He
say,
doesn't
I
say-
don't
no,
want
he doesn't-
it.
he doesn't seem to
Don't let
want
him
to.
talk. Maybe it will be the exception we are looking
So
for.
he said, okay, so he said one of his life's goals was to get a degree from the Nigerian law school, and now he has gotten it. Now he's torn, with the decision to either accept this or just,
Let's go
My
on.
point is, you should realize, how the Bible says, "Let he that takes that thinks to stand takes it, let's."
But then again,
You should
Beyond his
realize
appointment,
this is an issue of the soul.
wow. So
The people
yeah.
that have gone ahead
Yeah.
of him,
It snares you.
the people that have gone, because
It's a
his
story.
reputation is at stake right
but
now.
maybe he's different. Maybe they see
Well, if he's
something
going to-
about his opinions,
which is
that
why
they can
I
apply to
said-
their ruling or
which is
policy.
why
But
I
what really
said he
stops him
thinks he
from
can
holding
stand.
it? Does anything stop him from holding an opposing view, nonetheless working with her?
Working with- It's going to be very difficult because
Conflict of
he's
interest.
hired as a spokesperson.
They're
Yes.
speaking on
So
their
how are you a
behalf.
You're supposed to
spokesperson
defend them.
when you have
Does it
different
mean that
views?
why I mention this is because people always fail to realize that when he goes on his personal account, for instance, Twitter, he wants to churn out his opinion. You unfortunately that right has been stolen away from you by virtue of your appointment into that
That is
office.
true.
Exactly.
So he needs to, like Funmi is saying, someone needs to hamper it and continue to hammer it in. You cannot. It is you are barred from ever saying anything contradictory to what your principle
Yes.
is.
Because once you're a
stands for.
spokesperson, you're seen as the voice of whoever it is that you
Yes.
represent. So even when you tweet from your personal account,
Yep.
it's considered
there's
the
some-
official
Yep.
view.
And there are
After the
some
appointment.
things that are very difficult to defend without sounding
Huh.
stupid.
Well, the legislature. Let's also remember, legislature holds the executive on
Yeah.
their toes. Keeps them on their toes. So
Yeah.
let's consider all these elements fusing together. But Adenike, I'll come to you for this next story from the Guardian newspaper. Court nullifies KADUNA'S bill to regulate pastors. We recall that there was a bill that was sent to the House. The bill was almost speedily passed. To regulate the activities of churches in Kaduna State. Now, the High Court sat and declared as illegal the religious regulatory bill that was passed by the House of Assembly, saying it infringed on the fundamental rights of pastors to propagate Christianity in the state. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. And I will start from the Pentecostal Fellowship of Nigeria's lead counsel, Sani Akani, who said that it goes against Section 38, subsection 1 of the Constitution that allows everybody to propagate his religion in teaching, actions, in observance, and in worship. And El Rufai actually did come under a lot of fire in 2016 or so when this made the rounds on social media and then found out that, oh yes, the House of Assembly had passed it and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But my question to Nigerians is, at what point, would we ever get to a point where we know for a certainty that religious activities must be regulated in this country? And this is without mincing words. The two major religions that we know in this country, Islam and Christianity. Someone posted, just a few days ago on social media, she has a mosque around her house. She has two churches on her street. And guess what? Her 4-year-old daughter woke up that morning at 3 a.m. and was crying. And opened the window, I was saying, I want to sleep. And I'm glad that some people actually reached out to her, because I reached out to her to say, you know what, you can actually report these religious institutions.
Yeah.
But in comparison to what El Rufai was saying, his was about licensing the ministers themselves. And to be very honest, I feel very strongly, this is me throwing my personal opinion there, that there has to come a time where individuals and the institutions that they work with must have government recognition.
Yes.
Whether it's licensing, I'm not really sure, because the danger of licensing is the fact that you may want to hamper on their activities and stifle their hands and blah, blah, blah. If we're sure that it would not mean you cannot have your service when you so desire,
Yes.
bring in anybody, blah, blah,
But at
blah,
least some level
without
of regulation.
without infringing. I'm sure that what informed this is the fact that he has seen too many unscrupulous people under the guise of religion, not only siphoning people, doing unnecessary things. So it's a very dicey conversation.
Yes,
but the
it
fear is, except we're certain that we know what exactly they intend to regulate, why they want to license these ministers, then I do not think it would be right for us to just applaud the Kaduna State government to say, hey, go on. And it's good that the judge has already come out and said that, you know what, this is infringing on fundamental human rights. We know for uncertainty that it's infringing. But in this particular story, people are now bringing up a different conversation, because the law says that once you exchange written addresses, you have a 3-month window within which the judgment must come. Guess what? The judgment did not come within that window. And people are saying, does it now nullify or void
No,
this judgment? It
doesn't.
doesn't. It really doesn't void the judgment, as the case may be. They're saying, the respondents and the government, they're saying that, oh, we don't agree, we're going to appeal. Thank God the judicial system is there, appeal to the, very top.
Can I really say something about
Yes, please.
regulation? I don't think regulation is our problem.
Okay.
I think our problem, we have enough regulations. I think our problem is the fact that there's this certain resistance or hesitation to enforcing them, particularly when it comes to religious houses or religion. So let's talk about the sound. The reason why you could tell that woman to report is because there is a law. There is a legislation already involved in it.
Yes.
So you cannot begin to, in the sense, license pastors and stuff. But religious bodies, religious persons are all under, they are subject to the same laws that we are. So if we're going to deal, no, apart from right to worship, in exercising your right, you should not infringe on
someone
mine.
else's right, like noise pollution.
Exactly.
Like
So
extortion.
our issue right now is hesitation
Yes.
to enforcing those laws, or being the ones to report when those laws are infringed upon because it's a religious house.
On that note, we'll call it quits on the show. Actually, let's continue the conversation. We're not ending here. Let's continue on social media with the hashtag FreshlyPressed91, on Twitter at Smooth91FM. Follow at Funmi Odunde on Twitter. That's Funmi. And of course, Adenike at Adenike Oyetunde. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Join us next as we talk entertainment inside of the grapevine.